Welcome to ShapeHer Talks. I'm Karina, and with four lovely ladies, that's Constance, Marta, Lena, and Kira, we organize these sessions that aim to equip young women with practical advice and tools to help them progress in their careers. We choose these topics based on issues that affect women in general, but they're usually very universal. So we accept everybody. We want to include everybody. So if you have male friends that ever want to participate, please feel free to invite them as well. Before I go into introducing the speakers and some housekeeping items, I'll give it to Fanny, our hub curator, to introduce the hub. So this project is part of the Global Shapers Paris Hub. And Fanny, there you go.
Thanks, Karina, and thank you to our dear speakers for joining us tonight. We're very happy to have you. Thank you for taking the time, especially if it's 2 a.m. now in Singapore. So thank you so much. It's highly appreciated. Just to give you a bit of context on who we are, the Global Shapers Paris, we're part of the World Economic Forum. We drive action and change in our city, and so we engage in different projects ranging from education to diversity, inclusion, and to sustainability. And as part of our projects, we also organize these conferences to help women in their careers, like Karina said. So thank you for being here today, and hopefully this exchange, this discussion will help everyone who's in this call. Thanks for everyone who joined tonight.
Okay, thank you. So today's topic is entrepreneurship, and I will briefly introduce the speakers. And I say briefly because these ladies have so many achievements that I think it would take the full hours just to go through them. But if you want to learn more, just look them up, Google them, go to their LinkedIn pages. You have some references on our global hubs, Global Shapers Paris Hub page, so you'll find more information. So we have with us Jean, who's the CEO and co-founder of Konexio, a social startup that promotes the socio-economic inclusion of vulnerable populations, including refugees and migrants. She is a fellow at the Harvard Center of Public Leadership, Stanford graduate, Forbes 30 Under 30, and the Global Shaper at the Paris Hub. Victoria is founder at Chipsafer, which is a patented platform that can track cattle remotely and autonomously, which sounds very technical. She is an electronics, telecommunications, electrical engineer, entrepreneur, inventor, United Nations Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, and a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Sinead is a research fellow at MIT's AI Policy for the World Project, where she focuses on global technology innovation, democracy, and policy. She also holds a Sainsbury Management and Entrepreneurship Fellowship at Harvard Business School. I hope I didn't get any of that wrong, because those were already quite a few distinctions. To everybody in the audience, so a few housekeeping items. The session is recorded. Please mute your mic if you're not speaking. Please turn off your camera if you're not one of our guest speakers or moderators, so that we can focus on the people speaking. And last but not least, my colleagues Marta and Constance will be moderating. The session will take about an hour. So for the first 30 minutes, we'll go through some questions that we think are of general interest. And then for the second half, we already received some questions from the audience through our registration form. So we'll go through those. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and we'll try to go through as many of them as possible. So without further ado, Marta, Constance, I'll give it to you guys.
Amazing. Thank you for this introduction, Karina. It is indeed hard to make it brief about our speakers, but maybe our questions will allow to get more specific information regarding your entrepreneurship journeys. So maybe starting from the start, the first question would be, what led you to become entrepreneurs? What are the reasons behind you taking this path towards entrepreneurship? And maybe to respond, We could start alphabetically with Jean. So yeah, please go ahead.
Good reason alphabetically. First of all, super happy to be here and amongst other really, other inspiring women entrepreneurs. Maybe to get into a little bit about how Konexio came about. I think if someone had told me a few years ago that I would be running a social enterprise and running it in France, I really would not have believed them. I think for me, I kind of consider myself in the category of entrepreneurs that I ran into an issue or a problem, something that was so important that I felt like I really needed to be implicated in it. I think it was that drove me in, and then I built basically the solution around the problem, because my kind of foray into entrepreneurship was actually a Fulbright fellowship where I had worked at the Paris School of Economics, was doing research on economic research on inclusion of different vulnerable populations, including migrants. And for my work, I was, on the ground doing field interviews for about 2 years, really getting to understand the problems that were on the ground. And through that, I had seen one of the big things were that the interviewees were telling me, it's great that, I have housing, it's great that I have these basic services met, but I've been here 2 years, I don't have a job, I don't have a professional network, I feel really stuck. And I heard that story over and over and over again. And so I kind of put 2 and 2 together, given I was surrounded in undergrad by kind of the tech space, and you kind of take for granted some things. And I think when we talk about the digital divide and the big issues today, having a basic mastery of digital skills is almost like speaking the language. And if you're not included, we see that with COVID, where I think in the US only 4% of people who did not have a high school degree were able to do remote work at the start of the COVID crisis. And so huge disparities that you guys see. And so for us, the mission behind Konexio is to how to empower people, but empower them with really the right skills. And so the first kind of cohort, I had a small group of volunteers. I convinced a center to give me the space for free. We started with one group of students, one small center. And I found out at the end of that first cohort of students in the summer of 2016 that 3 of my students were Sudanese refugees. They were coming 100 kilometers by way every single week to take the course. And so that was kind of the start, and wanted me to go further.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jean. Maybe next in line, Sinead, if you want to share your story with us.
Yeah, sure. So the context is very different, but it's kind of interesting that I probably share some of the same feelings and sentiments as Jean, which is interesting. So I have both been an entrepreneur as well as studied and researched entrepreneurship and innovation quite a lot. So, I have my story, and then I've seen the stories of hundreds of other entrepreneurs. And I think what I share with Jean and probably with a lot of other entrepreneurs is that when I've started something that's entrepreneurial, it's usually because it's a question that I want to answer for myself, or it's a part of research that I'm doing that has some sort of commercial viability. And and so my last startup that focused on government national security, we scaled the business to a $7 million revenue stream in the first 18 months before moving into private sector and scaling it through private contracts. But that research had been something that I've been working on long before I decided to try to commercialize it. So I think similarly to Jean, it's something that I was working on and excited about anyway, and was able to see that there was a need for it and there was a demand for that type of work if packaged properly and sold as a solution. So that's probably how I became an entrepreneur. And I think in my research, academia is quite entrepreneurial as well, because you're answering questions that other people haven't, and you're trying to find solutions to things that don't currently exist. So I think that the entrepreneurship has come to me as opposed to me going, to it, and it's it's kind of just interest in these topics that have pushed me to think entrepreneurial about things.
Yeah, love it. And I'm sure entrepreneurship will come to a few women in this audience as well. Sounds great. Last but not least for this first question, Victoria, how was your path to entrepreneurship?
My path was interesting. So I have always been passionate about space. I love space exploration, and I always saw myself working in the space industry since I was 4 years old. But still, I always had this curiosity, and love of technology and science. And when I was 12 years old, there was in Uruguay, that is my home country, there was a very big outbreak of an animal disease called foot and mouth disease. And this affected a lot of the livestock. And our main source of export in Uruguay are livestock products. So when this epidemic happened, we couldn't export any more beef. And that really damaged the economy, not only of Uruguay, but also of the whole region. So I started thinking if I could be able to track, if there could be a system capable of tracking these animals remotely and detecting anomalies on time and preventing the expansion of a disease. And but then it's something that stays there, as many other ideas that I used to have all the time. And but then when I was after I graduated as an electronics engineer, I saw that there was a conference from IT. I actually was looking for conferences where I could present a paper that I had done about satellite technology. And obviously the number one place I went was the ITU, International Telecommunication Union. And so when I'm there, I see that there is this billboard in the website that says, there is a call for young innovators that can solve a problem in the region using telecommunications. And I immediately thought about this thing that I had thought about before, which was tracking cattle. And I was working with small satellites, so I saw that I could use the technology I was using for the satellites to create a wearable for the animals. And I submitted the idea to the competition. And then I was told that I won the competition, which was really, I was really excited to have won. And then they told me, okay, and here is a spreadsheet where you need to put what you're going to do with the prize money. And I was like, what? I didn't know that there was a prize money, or like I knew there was a prize money, but I didn't know that it was for something like that. I had to put it on a spreadsheet. So I went to the terms and conditions, and it said that the money was for you to start your startup. And so I literally went to Google and Google startup, and I saw what it was. And at the time I was going to do a PhD in aerospace engineering. And so I had to decide if I wanted to start the company or pursue the PhD. And after doing some thinking and doing some traveling, I realized that what I really wanted to do was the entrepreneurship part. And so I said no to the PhD, and I pursued the entrepreneurship career.
Amazing, very impressive choices. Sounds good. I see we have a few questions in the chat already, and I know we have a few others already in stock. So maybe just to be brief, another question regarding your entrepreneurship journey, if I may say. What are some issues that you faced? So basically, we say that, failing is not failure, it's learning. But in your journey, in your entrepreneurship journey, if there are some issues that you had that you could have and would have liked to avoid, which would these be? Maybe Victoria, like this, we can do the round the other way.
Yeah, there are several things that I wish I had done different. I mean, I started in 2012, and as I said, I started without even knowing. Like, I remember I went to a course of entrepreneurship that the ITU funded us to go and take a course of 2 weeks. And I remember one of the things that they told us was investors, and I didn't even understand why an investor would invest in our company. Like, why would somebody put their own money on your thing? So it was something that I really need to understand. as an engineer in the engineering, at least in the engineering career in Uruguay where I did it, there wasn't really much business talks. So I really had to learn kind of by doing. And so I did a ton of mistakes by doing that. A lot of things could have done more efficiently or faster or better. But to be honest, I learned a lot through all the experience. I many times say that, many times I know a lot of people that spend a lot of money on MBAs. I didn't spend the money. I just learned through all my mistakes, and everything that I was doing. So it is expensive too as an MBA, but at least you're having the experience. So yeah, there is a lot of things that I would have done different, but I think that I learned a lot from all of the mistakes.
Great. I love optimism, so that's perfect. Sounds great. What about you, Sinead?
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot. There's a lot to learn. It's really crazy. So even from how do you get your first customer on board, and how do you get that customer to then stay with you on the journey, and to get more customers, and then to get investors on board. There's definitely a lot to learn. I would say probably the biggest mistakes that I made initially that had kind of really long-term consequences for early startups that I was involved with was not having, and this sounds really boring because the exciting stuff about a startup is of course like hiring people and getting investment and building something. But I think the most important thing initially is to get a good lawyer, because I've had to use them several times, because things can get really messy when there's money on the table. So always get a really good lawyer, and make sure from day one that your company is structured in a way such that it's favorable for investors, because you can have the most incredible team and the most amazing product that everyone wants, and it could be like a winner, but if it's not in an ideal company format in terms of like where it's geographically domiciled or for whatever tax reasons, then investors just won't go near it. That is, of course, if you're trying to get investment, that's super important. So I think, as boring as it sounds, like, the exciting parts of entrepreneurship are obviously building and scaling something, but it's so important to get a good lawyer and to make sure that the documentation and that your hiring processes and your contracts and that the actual setting up of the business is done properly. Otherwise, you could waste a year, 2 years, 3 years and realize that it was always kind of doomed to fail. So I've done that before, and if I could go back, I would tell myself to get a good lawyer. And there are loads of lawyers that specialize with startup law, and a lot of the good reputable lawyers that do focus on startups usually have some kind of clause in their contract where you don't pay them until you raise money. So by no means go and spend 10,000 euros on a lawyer. Get a good lawyer that has dealt with startups before, that can deal with you pre-revenue and pre-investment. It's probably my top advice.
Yeah, no, very relevant. I don't know if we have some lawyers in the audience, but again, feel free to make yourself known and connect. Sounds good. What about you, Jean? Any regrets of issues that happened and could have been avoided?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on some of the, we're still a small team, we're about 30 across 2 countries now, but I think some of the things that I think were more challenging for me or harder for me, and I think each person is different, is some of the hard interpersonal relationships. I think one of the things I had to learn pretty hard firsthand is that as you grow in the organization, you can know you're as best as your team is, and so you really have to build a solid team around you, be very complementary in your skill sets, and unfortunately also realize that as the organization grows, that there are certain folks who are really good at a certain phase in the organization, but as you just start to scale, you need to specialize. socialize. And so sometimes, not something that I regret, but I wonder if there was, ways I could have, dealt with them a little bit better, or just, a bit more, is that on some of the relationships, I think I've had to make hard HR decisions and let people go. And every time I've done it, I've realized that I should have had that conversation a little bit earlier. Because, when you have a relationship where one person is not maybe feeling, satisfied in their work, or you're seeing certain things, it's always kind of a double side in the sense we both feel that. And so I think some of the challenges that you grow is that it's also sometimes about really being able to make that hard decision and be able to say that when I make a decision, even if, you really feel strongly about the person, they're a great friend, it also has to come down to, is this the best decision for the organization in general? And so that's something actually, with working with executive coaches and things I've gotten a lot more, reflection on and to be able to do, is that when I make some of those decisions now, I also think about, I want to make sure that this is a path going forward for everyone involved that is the best. And sometimes you have to, when, comes to it, make those kind of harder decisions to say that, we might take this path now. It's not the end of it, but, we see that this is probably the best stage for, where the organization is. And so I think those are maybe the things that have been hard for me in the past.
Amazing. Thank you all for your insights. I think my colleague Marta has a few more specific questions to ask now to our speakers. So Marta, please.
Thank you, Constance. And I remember hearing about those stories, Jean, so it makes sense to see that pointed out as a difficulty you had. For Victoria, actually, we wanted to ask you, because you mention very often in your interviews the importance of networks like the Space Generation Advisory Council. And if you could tell us specifically what kind of skills, if it was just the networking itself, what actually contributed to your path as an entrepreneur through those professional groups. And of course, and the question.
Yes, I think that in my case with Space Generation Advisory Council, that was an amazing organization that opened so many doors for me. And one of the things that that I learned a lot was about working with other cultures, especially also working with volunteers. Many times when you have in a startup, you can't really pay people a lot in the beginning. So, it's I think that the how to motivate people and how to work with people from all over the world is very important, that I learned in SGAC. Another thing that I think that was super important was the network. When you're part of an organization like SGAC, many times you have access to world leaders, or you have access to the CEOs of very big companies that you wouldn't have access, in your regular life. And just because, this is an organization for young people, and that always, I think, executives are looking to talk to young people and to get fresh ideas and to get a lot of input. Also, when you talk to young people, you feel so energized all the time. So I think that is something that is a win-win situation for both. The younger generation gets all the insights and the mentorship from the senior people, and then the senior people would also get a lot of new ideas and energy from the younger generation. So I think it's a really complement situation. And yeah, for me, it's been super important to be part of organizations like that. And in many cases, they ask me, why would I be volunteer for an organization when I need to, focus on my career and everything? And being volunteer is super important, I think, to build a network and to get work skills that you wouldn't otherwise.
Maybe Jean, Sinead, if you would like to add something on your experiences on the sort of support base and networking groups.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead. Totally agree with Victoria. And actually, we've been in some of the same networks, which is amazing because it's kind of come full circle several years later, which is really cool. Yeah, you can never have enough people who will help you or back you, and it's probably the one thing that I invest most of my time in, which is building new networks, because not only is it fun, you get to meet new people, but it's like a massive support system. So completely agree with Victoria.
Yeah, no, I think on my end, I think something that's really good to also workshop even at the beginning of the adventure is just getting to talk to people, informational interviews. If you want to get into a sector, if you want to know how things work, I think it's super valuable because I think it gives you insights, feedback, all of that. And I know that sometimes with other social entrepreneurs, I'm in different movements in France, and, it's great to be part of the Global Shapers because it's such a dynamic group of ambitious young individuals too, that sometimes just being able to bounce off ideas, to exchange best practices. Some of the incubators or the programs we've done, we have smaller focus groups where we really get to workshop every month, have one point where we just talk and exchange. And I find that super valuable. You learn a lot about yourself, you learn about the organization, and having those at different levels, whether that's, local or at a more international level, I think is really, really helpful.
Thank you. I think that's a great incentive for people to look there for their niche networking group and to start getting involved. So actually, instead of continuing to ask our questions, we want to make sure that the audience gets to participate. And we have a mix from questions that we got at registration and also some that have been appearing in the chat. So we'll move on to those. I'll try to say your names correctly, but let me know if I make a mistake. So from Noor Meiri, I think this question is for Jean. How did you build a community of 1,000 fans? So how did you come up with such a large fan base?
I think probably some of those are our students, so I don't know if that's cheating a little bit there, but I think it's it kind of this domino effect, and I think I responded maybe to the question of Barbara and the question of Barbara in the chat of how do you kind of get that ball rolling and started. And I think for us, we were always in this phase of, kind of taking the lean startup, really building small, iterating quite quickly in the beginning. So, we had no funds. We really bootstrapped to start the first classes. And I think it was kind of by word of mouth that we got to grow bigger. We had more people join. So it was very kind of a grassroots movement turned into, much more professional organization where we have our staff, we have really high quality trainers today. But I think we would not have been able to get there had we not had those first iterations. And so kind of going out, proving out your impact quite quickly, I think is really important. And then I think sometimes it's a snowball effect of getting those first partners to really believe in you, which is the hardest, because you're at a stage where you're just pitching. No one has really seen maybe the real results. It's always this chicken or the egg of, funders sometimes want to see results, but to get results, you need funding. So you feel a little bit stuck. And then as well as thinking about, as you kind of launch and build the adventure, who are the different partners strategically you should build in. And so I think Konexio, we've done a good job of being able to place ourselves quite interesting at the nexus of three big sectors of, we work really well with the humanitarian, all the NGOs, the organizations who are partners who source us students. We work really well with government, directly with different ministers, directly with the local, regional, national government, and then the big, institutional agencies, whether that's UNHCR and others, and then finally the companies who also, support us, but also are interested in our talent. And so trying to think about, shared value partnerships and what you can bring. I think partners can also bring in other source, whether that's actual funding or that can be, in-kind kind of resources. That's also really important.
Of course, you also forgot your fans at the Global Shapers. But maybe the fact that, there's this aspect of social impact that is so connected to Konexio also, makes it grasp a larger spectrum of a fan base. So another question from Roberto Rivera. What do you do when your competition plays unfair? I think this can go for all of you, and we'll take it alphabetically, like at the beginning.
Is that me alphabetically?
Oh,
I forget
sorry.
which we were.
I think that means it starts with you.
Okay.
Jean.
That's a good question. I think, knock on wood, we've been fairly lucky in the sense that, we have other code schools we work with, but we're never, like others consider us in competition, but we've also found ways to strike out a nice balance of, sometimes we'll compete for maybe the same types of opportunities, but other times we actually will strategically partner together in kind of a consortium and work together. So I think, but if I were maybe hypothetically to put myself in a scenario where you do have competitors that do play unfair, I think one of the things to be able to leverage is also maybe what is the unique value add of your product, in the sense that, there has to be certain differences, even if you're maybe in a given sector, given activity, and just focus and iterate on what makes you different. So I think rather than trying to maybe I would, think about it, getting too involved in maybe how the competition is maybe trying to, steal your customers, or, I think of some big rivalries that we've seen in the tech space, maybe thinking about hunkering down on what makes your value add, what makes, your product stand out, and make that shine, rather than maybe concentrate on taking energy and draining that from what your competitor is doing. And maybe there's, some limited damage control you probably should do to make sure that it doesn't, go further. But also then on one hand, just concentrating on building better your product, and also making that difference between you and the competitor even greater.
It's really the cherry on the cake to hear such positive messages regarding rivalry and competition. It's usually a more, draining discourse. So Sinead, would you share the same feelings on well?
Yeah, I'm going to add the negative stuff here. So no, it's not negative, but I guess I would probably see the question a little bit, or think about the question a little bit differently. So, my frame of reference is the US venture capital system. And honestly, there are no rules. There really aren't. And so when you think that someone is playing unfairly, the reality is that they're probably playing within the rules. So I kind of go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is like, get a great lawyer, and, get a recommendation for a lawyer, because the chances of you needing to use them at some stage are real. But outside of that, I'm probably going to echo a little bit of what Jean is saying, which is that every startup is constrained by resources. So there is no startup that has unlimited resources and unlimited personnel and ideas and money and time. And so knowing that your competitor is limited in what they can do in terms of resources or time, you can find a way to beat them. And kind of what Jean was saying, like, your point of differentiation can be on price, it could be on quality, it can be on who you serve and how you serve them. I'm of the opinion that there can be 10,000 startups that serve the same problem, just in different ways. And so it's trying to find what is your unique target area where you have a competitive advantage, and trying to double down on that. But I think having the mindset that, probably someone's going to try to, if you're working in a sector that is going to scale, or you're working on an idea that is scalable within a large sector, I can nearly guarantee you that there's 20 other startups working in there too. And it's competitive. And so there's no such thing as rules, unfortunately, most of the time. But you can control how you target that market and what your point of differentiation is. And so the only thing that you can do, and this is what investors are trying to see, is that point of differentiation that you've chosen the right strategic way to address that market. And whoever gets that right ultimately will win. So I think all is fair in love and startups.
Yeah,
to get a lawyer. Sorry, Victoria, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just, no, I think that, you know, it's something that I remember when I just started, I just graduated, you know, and when you're like in academia, I think that you can speak better of this, but I think that when you're in academia, you know, you are very careful not to plagiarize, not to, you know, all the papers, it has to be something very unique, very like that. And then you get into the business world and then you see people copying and everything. And it's like, what? Come on, this is not fair. But I mean, it's something that I think that I got my product copied. I even got a person copy my pitch. Like when I would say and, the person would say and. When I would say then, the person would, like, to that level of detail, you know. And so I was like, okay, you know, but it's something that happens. I think that you know, it's something that you need to understand that happens. And I think that you of course, I don't want to say what it was said before again, but it is, yes, you need to really differentiate yourself and understand, you know, many times one thing that happens a lot is having customers which come to you and they say, oh, you know what, your direct competitor came to me and is offering me this for like half the price. And you're like, yeah, I know, but mine has this and this and this and this, which the other one doesn't. So, you know, it's up to you what you want to decide. But it's also something that, you know, you can't be running after the competition, you know, because maybe what they have or what they claim they have many times is not what they really do. So you need to focus on your product, make sure that it's really good, that it's market fit. You know, because of course, if you have a product that the customer doesn't want to buy, then there's no point. I mean, who cares about the competition? Make something that it's that the market wants to buy, but also don't get too distracted. But be aware of all the competition. We are very aware of all the new products that are coming up. We're aware of everything. But at the same time, we're also focused on what we are doing. You know, we don't get carried away every time we see a new press release or a new product being put in the markets. You know, it's normal to have competition. And the problem would be if there is no competition, because that would mean that there is no market. So, you know, having competition is actually something that shows that there is a market for your product.
I really like that you're highlighting the importance of the market fit. I think especially coming from an engineering background, sometimes you just want to invent something because it's cool. And I've seen it happen where, you know, it doesn't stand the test of time, and you really have to have that perspective on the market and to keep it in mind. So another question from Fatima Barak. Your beginnings in entrepreneurship, what helped you the most to do the first step and to keep going? So we've already heard a bit about your beginnings, but if you can just choose one thing that was the most important for you to make a first step, let us know. We'll go with Victoria and then Sinead.
I think that the most important for me was that winning that competition. You know, this was there was entries from all over the world for this, and I think that really gave me confidence. I mean, having the ITU thinking out, you know, this can be a business idea, and also at the time I didn't really understood anything, so I never knew that how hard work it was to be an entrepreneur. To be honest, I had to, you know, when you see that, this is something that I generally tell people, when you see the entrepreneurs, you generally see the very successful ones. You don't see the ones that are struggling or how much hard work it is to get to that success. Or you generally, when stories are told about entrepreneurs, I think that people immediately go to the Facebook story. You know, that is the dropout that met this person and this other person and this other person and then built Facebook, and it's great. When actually it's a lot more struggles, I think, in the way. Not saying that Mark Zuckerberg didn't have to work very hard, because he did and everything, but at the same time he also got really good connections. He was also in Harvard, you know. It's different when you start in a university in Uruguay than when you start already in a university where you have a lot of different networks and connections. So I think that that winning that competition and really not knowing what entrepreneurship was about was really gave me a lot of confidence to start.
Yeah, Sinead, if you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, so in my mind, I kind of differentiate between a couple of different types of businesses. And, I think what Victoria is talking about and the types of businesses that I've typically been involved with are more deep technology focused. So it's not that you're going to be able to get 1,000 users in 5 days and keep scaling, because you're actually building something that's quite technological, and you could spend years working on a piece of hardware or software with maybe one customer. But the value of that one customer is maybe it could be higher than 1 million users somewhere else. The other type of business is kind of consumer facing, where you could sell a product or a service to thousands or millions of people instantaneously. And so I've worked in both, and I think they both require completely different first steps. So with the more difficult technology, two of my businesses have been that focused. And really for me, it's all about, can I get the right people? Can I get the team involved? Because it could, you're basically trying to get as much market validation as you can at a very early stage to get the interest of both investors and customers. Big customers don't want to waste their time with small startups because they don't really have the resources or the desire to deal with testing a lot of the problems that you might have. And so it's all about coming together with the right team and saying, well, we have the leading expert in X, Y, and Z, and this is a problem that we know that you're facing, and we want to help you with that. With my last business, we were government focused, but the big first customer we got was Nike, and they're a really innovative customer, and we were able to find the one person, and there's always one person. It's never like everyone, it's usually one person in the organization who is willing to take a risk, who might need to do something a little more innovative to get a promotion, or who isn't senior enough that they can't focus on the small stuff. And we actually were able to get a really sizable contract from Nike, which is a great first customer to deal with in the private sector, by coming to them with a team and an interesting proposition. And they really enjoyed the process of working with the team. And so that's one way to do it. And then at the right now I'm working on something that's the complete opposite of that, which is more consumer based, and kind of echoing what Jean said earlier. It's really about finding that's really small group of people who obsessively want the thing that you're building, and building it for that group of people, knowing that once you have like a core fan base of obsessive people, that you can scale it to the more mainstream. So like trying to get your fringe people hooked. I mean, it's really difficult. It really is like, how do you get product market fit when you don't have anything to show the market? And then how do you get investment without product market fit? So it's really about trying to find either that initial traction through customers if you're consumer based, or if you're kind of more technical based, trying to find the right people to get like maybe your first one customer and building for that customer. But I mean, every type of business is different, and I mean, it's a fun problem, but it only when you've solved it, because it's really challenging. But usually, if there is a demand for what you're building, you will find one person or one group of people who will obsessively love what you build.
No, I think following up from what has already been said kind of on the question of the first steps, I think, for me, going back to some of it was getting that first, partner on board, or getting, that first cohort of students and seeing the real impact at the end of the day, them telling you, coming back and saying, thank you, I've been able to do this, this, and this because, launching my own e-commerce shop on the internet, or, becoming, a developer, getting that internship. I think those are the things that really kind of motivate, because sometimes you can get really stuck on the, I used to draw kind of like the little graph of what life as an entrepreneur is like. I would have like, a good news, and then you get bad news, then you get really good news, you get really bad news, and then you're so tired you fall asleep and you start over the next day. That's, how you felt really on this roller coaster of rides and the experience. And so I think now it's counting the little successes, but also making sure, we talk a lot about when you also even look at metrics. I've made a point intention, now to like really not, focus on what are metrics and also what are vanity metrics. And you learn about this kind of also in some of the, for example, Ben Horowitz has a great book called The Hard Thing of Hard Things that really helped me kind of think about entrepreneurship in a different way. And he talks about the example of, also being able to set indicators and objectives for yourself that make sure they're the true north, and don't take you off a path of this looks good, this sounds good, this makes you feel good, but they're actually not helping your core business and helping you to, drive deeper. And so, while, some metrics of, you can be maybe featured in news outlets, getting some visibility are great, maybe for your vanity, for your ego, they're not real metrics at the end of the day that are going to push forward your business. And so I think being able to make that distinction, having these little rewards that kind of help you along the way are really important. And then I think maybe just another note of how I see the whole entrepreneur experience now from maybe where I started this a few years ago is you really have to also take it as a marathon and not a sprint. I think in the first few months, I think I tried to too much do it as a sprint, and you get to burn yourself out. You're not also happy with your productivity because you're not being the most, well rested that you can be. And so now it's kind of taking it into the long run. This is a marathon, and it requires a certain level of discipline. It requires a certain level of control of how you manage your time, your priorities, and how you work with your teams.
Thank you, Jean. Actually, the next question is, I think you can also answer. It's from Yvette Marie on the process of becoming an entrepreneur in a different country, which was your case. You set up Konexio in Paris.
Yeah, so in general, I think the experience of doing that, I think in my specific experience, actually useful because since I work with students who are refugees and migrants, it really forced me also to kind of experience, not on, anywhere near the level, but still experience the sentiment of kind of being a foreigner, not knowing the rules, not knowing, how everything worked. Sometimes I think it played to my advantage because I think I did things that you were not supposed to do, but because they were so different, for example, sending out cold emails to really important people, you're told not to do that because in French culture, you have to have like a warm intro. And because I think it was just so different, actually worked in my favor. But I think there were other lots of social codes, things that I had no idea about. And in France, you have a system where I think it's very based on the diploma or what degree you get, what school you come from that really helps your career. And I think it's also shown me the extent of the issue that we have with, more diversity in kind of the tech sector, for example, in France. And so that also helped build, an arguments for us to, further our mission of working to, take down these walls, really show that we shouldn't have stereotypes or prejudice, and really be able to help, work and bring, talent from all sectors, all backgrounds, into kind of new opportunities and into kind of the future of kind of the world, work, and also future of, where our kind of opportunities labor market is evolving.
Thank you, Jean. We're, 10 minutes from ending the session, so I'll move to the questions in the chat. So starting with Fanny. So how would you define your competitive advantage? Is it coming from the problem you need to solve, or are you adapting to the skills, assets you have in your team? So it's 2 questions. And when having an insight on several market trends, how do you choose which way to go, which with your product or service? I can imagine that many paths can be taken. So maybe we can start with Victoria.
Yes, for the second question, you get that through interviews. The beginning, you need to start doing interviews, like a ton of interviews to different users or customers or who your target market is, and then from there you get all the insights. You know, that's how you decide. You also decide based on cost, based on technology available. You know, there are many things that you put into consideration, but the number one is what the customers want. I think that is the first thing that, and for that you need to talk to a lot of customers. I mean, you need to talk to make a lot of interviews, which I know that many, so I have some mentees, and one of the things that they ask me is, well, but if I go and I talk to someone, then I'm revealing my idea. And yes, you are. You know, sometimes you can, if it's more deep tech, like Sinead was talking about, it's more, you know, in that case, maybe you need an NDA. But then in that case, also your customers are probably a government or a big company, so it's different. But if it's more of a user type of thing, of consumer, you will need to go and talk about your idea. You can talk about your idea in a very general thing, you know, it doesn't have to be very specific on how you're going to build it, just say what you have. But I think that doing the market research and really talking to the customers and the users is extremely important. Also through the entire process of when you are developing, also making sure that what you are developing is what the customer wants. So I think that is very, very important. In our case, one time the customer really wanted a product. We did it. It didn't work. The customer was super angry, and we were like, okay, that's what you want. So that is also something that you need to weigh in. You know, many times customers ask you for something that then they don't really want. So you need to also understand a bit of the trade-offs and what paths to go, considering the technology that you have and the funds that you have available.
Thank you, Victoria. Sinead, would you like to add on the definition of the competitive advantage and your insight on market trends?
Yeah, so I think, you know, startups are like this great game of you have a really tiny amount of resources and you have to do a whole ton of stuff with that. So it's really about trade-offs and like figuring out super quickly what can you get away with doing the minimum of to have the best kind of outcomes. It's a really interesting point that that Victoria just made, because most of the time people don't actually know what they want themselves. So can you hear me, by the way?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Thank you.
You just froze. So I didn't know if it's me or not.
Yeah.
A lot of the time customers aren't entirely sure what they want themselves. So when you bring them an idea and you say, well, how do you feel about this idea or this product? A lot of the time they'll be like, yeah, actually, now that it's in front of me, it's not bad. The thing to remember is that a lot of the time people don't really know themselves what they want. And so a really interesting case study that I did was a business called Rent the Runway, which, if you don't know it, it's now like a multi-billion-dollar company. It was started by 2 females at Harvard Business School, and at Harvard Business School we have an obnoxious amount of balls that we go to, and they had the problem where they didn't want to keep buying dresses, but there was nowhere to rent them, and they wanted to rent stylish dresses. And so they were like, this is something I deeply care about, and I'm sure if I think about this, other people do too. It turned out anyway that not as many people cared about that one thing as they did, but what they were able to do when they surveyed people, they were like, sure, yeah, I want these designer dresses for super cheap, and I don't want to have to buy them. But what they didn't realize was that a lot of people really care about the logistics, and it was just way more complicated than that. And so what they did, and what a lot of startups should do, is find what we call the minimum viable product, which is just the smallest way that you can test your entire hypotheses. do people actually want to rent designer dresses that other people have already worn? With Uber, you know, it's kind of like, do people actually want to get into a stranger's car? And without building out an app, without building out the entire business, you can test little parts of this to start really figuring out, okay, these are the problems that I'm solving for that demographic. And once I understand what the problem is, I can look at my resources and say, the only way I can do this competitively, i.e. these are my advantages, is X, Y, and Z. Like maybe it's that I have the best team. Maybe it's that I can get my product to the customer much faster. More likely than not, it's going to be one thing because you have hardly any resources. And so it's really understanding the problem and then figuring out how to address that with whatever resources you have the best way. That will be your competitive advantage. And that's the thing that you have to like double down on. And everything else is a distraction.
It's really interesting to hear about that test approach and kind of having a sample of your business before going, you know, full throttle. Jean, would you like to add another element to the discussion, or would you like to?
Yeah, I can maybe do it very briefly because I think you guys have answered very thoroughly this question. But I think maybe less on the competitive advantage, but maybe in thinking about insight on market trends. I know something that we do and that's helpful is to have kind of an internal and then a kind of external way to evaluate kind of the trends. We're in the training space, so I think something that we have to realize is that if we don't adapt just the content, the way we do our trainings, because the labor market itself is evolving quite quickly, we will not exist in a few years. And so given that it's so core, what we do is we're really intense about kind of the feedback, the questionnaires, the surveys that we give our students. And we track them over time. So it's kind of, you have a baseline, you have like a T1 and a T6, you know, 6 months after the training, that helps us evaluate on the same indicators the change in, you know, whether it's gaining new skills, whether, you know, it's their, you know, outcomes now they're placed in jobs. I think it's really important. And I think the other thing that really helps us is we also look very externally at, you know, we're very kind of up to speed on what are the reports coming out on the future of work, on, you know, skills and different jobs, what are, you know, with what is really going on in that market, given that, and we have a scientific committee composed of a panel of experts that are, you know, entrepreneurs. There are in some of the big tech companies that help us also do kind of this work of surveying, given it is really essential to what we do. And so when we do have to make a decision eventually, it does come down to a mix of all these factors. So it's not, we kind of just, you know, kind of go with our gut kind of thing, but it comes with the gut plus kind of the internal kind of data supported, and then the external, the discussions and the qualitative kind of interviews we have.
Thank you for this very practical advice. Before we close the session, because we're running out of time and we want to make sure Victoria goes to sleep before 5 a.m., if you could just tell us if you had to select one book or a video that helped you a lot in your path, what would it be? We could start with Victoria, and then Sinead and Jean. I think by now, thought
to be honest, I have to say I get this question a lot about books. I do not. I try not to read about entrepreneurship. I don't want to stress myself more, you know, and reading what I'm doing wrong and everything. So I generally just read Dickens. That's my favorite author, and I think that it's you know, all of his books are of growth and of and you know, of self-made, and I think that really encourages me when I read his books. So for me, that is my favorite author, and I always read his books.
So I spend a lot of time working with venture capitalists, and for me that's really useful because understanding where they're coming from, what they're looking for in an investment, understanding how they take what is deeply personal to an entrepreneur and putting metrics around it and treating it like a business, and how to grow that business is super useful. And so most of the reading that I do is actually from the the side of the venture capitalist. But there's a great VC called Mark Suster. He's a partner and a founder at a venture capital firm in the US called Upfront VC, and he has a phenomenal website that he's been running for a few years called Both Sides of the Table, because he is sat on both the entrepreneur side asking for money, and now he's on the VC side and he invests. And so, I mean, there are so many resources out there, but I think there's some really good VC blogs, especially of VCs who have seen it from both sides, and they can kind of say, oh, when I did that as an entrepreneur, now I'm looking at it from the aspect of a venture capitalist, and I probably would have done it differently. And so I think Fanny just put it in the chat. Thanks a million. Yeah, he's a really cool VC, and there's some great gems in some of his blog posts. So yeah, that's probably where I'd start.
Yeah, I have like a lot of books in mind, and I'm kind of like that kind of maybe dork that likes to read all the kind of management books and things like that. So a recent one I really like, even though it has a really simple message, is just called The One Thing. But it's helped me concentrate on, as you can do a billion things in a day, but what are the things you have to do in order, and how do you think about prioritizing? And so that was something I read over kind of the holiday break, and it was pretty useful for me.
Thank you to all of you. I think we have a few books to add to our Kindle now. We're going to close the session. This was fantastic. It's lovely to hear your stories, and there was a lot of very practical, hands-on advice for current entrepreneurs or aspiring ones. So we hope this was helpful to everyone participating. Thank you again to all of you. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you at the next ShapeHer Talk.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.